Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. This video is for the AQA GCSE Biology course and it's centred on chapter B18.12, Sustainable Food Production. Again, as always, look out for the learning outcomes and the syllabus references as we go through this PowerPoint. So we're going to be concentrating on the idea of sustainable food production, thinking about different ways that we as a species can produce food to feed ourselves and to be able to feed the next generation and the next generation. So we're going to be able to take as much as we need for our generation without harming the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And there's many different ways we can consider this. The first one I'd like you to consider and look at is fish production and overfishing and sustainable fish production. So just as a brief starter to this video, I'd like you to consider these boats. What do they do? What's their function? Pause the video, comment below, what do you think the boats do? What if you said that these boats are fishing vessels? Then you would be correct. In fact, the largest boat here is a fish processing factory vessel. And boats like these allow normal fishing boats to stay at sea much longer and catch much more fish than ever before. It's a highly efficient process. If you compare to a normal size factory, this one is in Grimsby, one of the fishing ports of the UK. And when we use a factory like this on land, the fishing vessels need to return to the shore to process the catch. They can't stay at sea too long and they can't catch too many fish, which would be a more sustainable idea. In fact, the Chinese fleet is huge. Here you can see just a small portion of fishing vessels heading out from China, and here you can see an image from 2020 where we have the Galapagos Islands here at the top. Perhaps I'll do that in white. There's the Galapagos Islands, and then down here just outside the marine reserve, and in some cases encroaching into the marine reserve around the Galapagos Island, is a Chinese fishing fleet utilizing those very large factory vessels that we've seen. So the Chinese fleet can fish and catch a huge number of fish, even though it is many thousands of miles away from the Chinese mainland. In fact, in the last 60 years, large commercial fishing fleets have increased the amount of wild fish caught, and the level of fishing is out of control and unsustainable. For example, in the North Sea near the UK, almost all the breeding fish have been caught, and this means that the rate of reproduction is too low to replace all the fish that are caught each year. If people are going to be able to catch fish in the future, fish stocks need to be managed sustainably. The level of bluefin tuna in the Mediterranean Sea and cod in the North Atlantic are close to disappearing. Half the world's fish is caught by just 7 major economies, and the largest of those, with 18 million tonnes caught per year, is mainland China. Here we can see an image giving you an idea of just how large some of those fishing nets are that are being used now. The idea of small little vessels catching a small amount of fish is no longer an accurate reflection of fishing in the world's oceans on an industrial scale. So how can we tackle the problem? Well, there's various measures we can use to reduce overfishing, and this includes controlling the size of the holes in the fishing nets, so only adult fish are caught. Juvenile fish are not caught, and so they can survive, grow to adulthood and breed and replace the fish that have been caught. We can have bans on fishing during the breeding season, again to allow reproduction to happen and to allow fish to be produced ready for the next generation and the next breeding and the next year's fishing season. We can have strict quota limits on the amount and type of fish that fishermen are allowed to catch. Quotas are only of limited use though, as for fish once caught are generally dead. So any of the wrong sized fish are returned to the sea, but they're unable to breed and unable to produce fish for the next generation. However, quotas do limit the number of fishing trips, and so they do limit the number of fish caught over a year. These protection measures have helped to conserve fish stocks and increase sustainable fishing practices. However, many traditional fishing communities have lost their livelihoods due to these measures, so there are some advantages and some disadvantages to having these different measures to tackle overfishing problems. The next method of sustainable food production that we're going to look at is the use of biotechnology. Scientists around the world are trying to solve the problem of food shortages and factory farming and shortening of the food chain, preserving biomass, encouraging the reduction in red meat consumption and an increase in the consumption of plant materials have all helped. But there are other possible solutions, and this includes genetically modified crops, genetically engineered microorganisms, and culturing microorganisms in fermenters to produce mycoproteins. So we could use, for example, genetically modified plants, and these will be used to increase the yields. So farmers want to increase the yield of their crops so that they can grow more crops per area of land, and they can do this by using fertilizers or pesticides or biological control methods, or indeed by genetically modifying plants. So farmers want to introduce genes to their crops to increase resistance to pests, to increase resistance to pathogens, to increase resistance to drought or a lack of water, and increase resistance to salt or increase salt tolerance. We can also increase the nutrients in the crop, so that the crop that the farmer is growing could have, for example, more proteins, more carbohydrate, more lipids, more minerals. One example of changing the nutrient values in the crop that we can do currently is to increase the vitamin content or the protein content of a food. We could change the balance of fats in the food, or we could encourage plants to produce vaccines against disease. One big example of all of this is golden rice. Now, golden rice has been altered to have high levels of vitamin A. And vitamin A is one of the vitamins that helps you to have good sight. Scientists could also look at producing mycoproteins. Mycoproteins are highly sustainable food sources because the fungi that they are made from use cheap food and reproduce rapidly. In fact, mycoprotein is derived from the fungi Fusarium species. It's suitable for vegetarians because the protein has not come from animals. The fungus is grown on a relatively cheap glucose syrup made from waste starch. The fungal cells are then grown in carefully controlled aerobic environments inside a fermenter to produce a maximum yield. In optimum conditions, the fungal cells can reproduce and double every 5 hours. The fungal biomass is harvested, purified and dried before it's processed into a pale yellow solid. This can then be shaped and flavoured to produce an end product. Mycoproteins are highly sustainable food sources because the fungi use cheap food and they reproduce rapidly. Now, those mycoproteins and the fungi that produce the mycoproteins reproduce in fermenters, and we've got an example of a fermenter here. In fact, an industrial fermenter is a large tank that can hold over 2 million litres of liquid culture. Industrial fermenters allow environmental conditions to be very carefully controlled, so you can control the temperature, the pH, the oxygen, the carbon dioxide and the nutrient levels within the fermenter, and this will ensure the microorganisms produce the maximum yield of the product. The temperature is controlled by having temperature probes to monitor the temperature and a cooling jacket which can be used to cool the water cool the fermenter if there's been too much aerobic reproduction producing too much heat. So what does that look like? Well, here is our full example here. So firstly, we've got the air inlet at the bottom here, and that is where we can put in oxygen to ensure that we have aerobic conditions. Within the fermenter. On the outside, we have our cooling jacket here, which can be filled with cold water, and that will cool down the fermenter if it gets too hot. Remember, if the energy and the heat energy produced during the growth of the fungus becomes too high, then it's going to damage the enzymes and denature the enzymes within the fungus and kill off the fungal cells. So it's really important that we maintain the ideal optimum temperature for fungal growth. So in order to do that, there are temperature probes which go into the fermenter and check the temperature, and also pH probes that will also go in and monitor the pH, because often many microorganisms will produce acidic waste products, so you need to be very careful that they don't build up. So you may need to remove those or add in an alkali to neutralize those. We also have stirring paddles. Those are very useful for making certain that all the nutrients and the fungi do not settle, but they are continually mixed, so we have efficient diffusion of the nutrients into the fungal cells and diffusion of any waste products out of the fungal cells. So the fermenter and the nutrients must be sterile before use to ensure that no unwanted microbes grow in there, and we have therefore no contamination. So how do you sterilize a fermenter? Well, fermenters are sterilized by having very hot, high pressured steam at over 125 degrees squirted into the fermenter here through the steam inlet, and then removed via the steam outlet. This is important to prevent contamination, because contamination by microbes would reduce the yield of products, and the unwanted microbes will compete with the organism, the fungi in our case, in the culture. The products would also be contaminated by waste products or cells from the foreign organism. So again, it's really important that within the fermenter we only have the correct species of fungi growing that we want in order to produce our mycoprotein. So I hope you've enjoyed this video thinking about different ways that we can produce sustainable food sources to feed our ever-increasing human population, not just in this generation but for the next generations. Please subscribe to the page if you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like the video and comment below if you to tell me what you've learned. Thank you very much for watching.